this video, we're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about inflated and real values, so how to look at the cash flows that are inflated versus cash flows that we call real. And then we're going to look at how to adjust the discount rate when you include inflation. And then finally, really, the conclusion is that you don't need to worry too much about inflation in Engr Economy. But I wanted to kind of go through that logic with you. So we take an investment that is generally this kind of format where we have an initial investment amount, and then over time we have returns, which we've been calling annual cash flows, in this case for 5 years. Now these annual cash flows are calculated in what's called real or constant dollars, which means they're calculated, if we're doing it today, it will be 2015 dollars. We would be ignoring inflation in the process of the calculation. Now, a different way we could do that is we could actually calculate the annual values in inflated or nominal dollars or dollars of the day. So we would, in this case, we would include an inflation rate. So the first cash flow is going to be A times 1 plus the inflation rate, 1 year of inflation. So F in this case is the inflation rate. And then the next year would be 2 years of inflation, or compounded, 1 plus f squared. The third is 1 plus f cubed. Very similar to what we've been doing with interest rate, but in this case it's inflation. And we will add inflation to all of those values. Now in the case of real or constant dollars, all we need is an interest rate. But in the case of inflated and nominal dollars, what we need is an interest rate and an inflation rate, f value. And in fact, when we look at the interest rate, when we include inflation, we can calculate based on an interest rate of what they've called a nominal or real interest rate. And we're going to add to that. So we go 1 plus inflation, 1 plus the interest rate times 1 plus inflation minus 1, because we want to take out that 1. That is equal to the compounded inflation rate. So what I'm going to do is go through an example so we can see how this works out. So in this case, let's assume we have a $1,200 investment that returns $300 a year for 5 years. We have a real interest rate of 10%. And in addition, we're going to say that inflation is 5% a year. So what we'll do then is, in order to calculate what are the cash flows going to be in an inflationary environment, the $1,200 is still going to be $1,200. But the next year is going to be 300 times the inflation rate. So it'll be 315. The next year is going to be 300 times 2 years of inflation, or 331. And then we continue on to get the cash flows every year that are going to be inflated at 5% a year. Now the thing we'll do now is we want to calculate the interest rate in this inflationary environment, and we're going to use this equation. So we'll take 1 plus the interest rate of 10% times 1 plus the inflation rate of 5% minus 1. That gives us a discount rate of 15.5%. So that's a nominal or inflated discount rate, where the real interest rate is 10%, the nominal is 15.5%. Now let's go ahead and calculate the net present values in each of these cases. So we'll set up a present value equation, minus 1,200 times 300 times p given a, comma, that should be comma, 10% for 5 years. And we look up that discount rate, and the net present value is minus 62.8. Now we're going to do the same thing here, but it's a little more complex because we can't see the cash flow pattern. So we take each of these years, and I'm going to use this higher discount rate. So I'm taking 315, discounting it 1 year back. In this case, I'm taking the 331 and discounting it 2 years back, etc. So I do that for all 5 years, and I get the same number, 62.8. So what I've shown you here is actually that we can include inflation by inflating all the cash flows and then adjusting the discount rate, or we could just ignore inflation and we'll get the same number. And so it's actually easier in Engr Economy to ignore inflation. But just know that we're doing that. We're assuming inflation can be anything, but whatever it is, we're just going to do all the calculations in real dollars. So the interest rate earned on an investment is the interest above the inflationary rate. So we're earning 10% above whatever the inflation is. If inflation is 5%, it's going to be above that rate. That's the real interest rate. And when you look at historical numbers on returns, like on the stock market, most of the time they're calculated ignoring inflation, or inflation is taken out of it, because we're very interested in what is the real rate of inflation. So in this video, we've covered inflated and real values, and we talked about how to adjust the discount rate. And really what I've proved to you is that we can ignore inflation in Engr Economy.